So welcome everybody. It's a pleasure for us at BNP to receive you at this third term webinar that we are organizing on acting effectively in risk related to COVID-19 crisis. We find it very important at BNP to communicate our recommendations to charities regarding how to face and to handle the crisis and overcome together that those difficulties that we are facing right now. I am very happy to, as President and CEO of BNP, to be also with three colleagues that will be presenting the webinar with me, and also a fourth one on the management of the placement that you have. So our three colleagues at BNP are Marc Lapointe, who is Vice President for Atlantic Provinces at the BNP. Marc was formerly business management manager and district sales manager also at General Motors for 10 years before going to University of Moncton as Director of Development, and he joined the team of BNP last year and is now Vice President for the Atlantic Provinces. So welcome, Marc, also. We have also Marie-Claire Morin. Marie-Claire was the Vice President for Ontario and Ottawa region for BNP. Marie-Claire has a lot of experience in fundraising. She was a founding president and CEO at the National Gallery of Canada Foundation. She was also executive director at the Accueil Bonneau Foundation in Montreal, also vice president advancement and alumni relations at Concordia University, before going to Oldbury Mission Foundation for 6 years as executive director. And so she's now in her fourth year at BNP as a Vice President, Ontario and Ottawa. So welcome also to Marie-Claire, who is with us today. And we have Daniel Lantin, who will talk about human resources. So Daniel is a CFRE, Certified Fundraising Executive. He is also certified as a CRHA for Human Resources in Quebec. He was formerly the manager of communication and development at Les Amputés de Guerre du Canada. He was also executive director at the Fondation REA in Montreal before joining the team recently of BNP. So welcome also to Daniel. And we have Mary Egerman. Mary, so she will talk about the portfolio management, and she is a portfolio manager at the Mary Egerman Group of Raymond James in Montreal. And Mary has a Master of Business Administration from the University du Québec at Chicoutimi. So welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be to present this webinar together. So first, we would like to introduce you a little bit the context of the crisis that we are facing right now. And we will just talk to you a little bit about those kind of situations that we have faced in the past. There was just a report that was coming out this week from Imagine Canada that was indicating that the crisis that we are facing right now should have a very huge impact on charities, with an impact of 9.5 billion in loss of income for the sector, and also 117,000 jobs that should be laid off only for charities across the country. So that's a huge impact that we are facing right now with this crisis. There is also, of course, a management plan that we can put in place to manage a recession. If you don't have So you're not alone. There is only 1/3 of nonprofit organizations that have a plan in place to manage a recession. And in the past, during years of recession, fortunately, there was no loss of donation. There was an increase of 0.3% annually on average during recession year. So unfortunately, I'm not sure that it will be the case this year, because of course that's a huge recession that we didn't see in the past, but that's something that we can expect. It won't be maybe probably too much impact, so much impact as we could imagine, but we will see. That's an unprecedented situation, of course. And we have to put the stock market also into perspective, and Mary will talk to us more about that. But from January 1st to February 28th, there was an over 40% of increase in the stock market before it begins to decline in the last 2 weeks. So we had a big increase in the last few months. And there was also in the SARS crisis in 2003, which we can compare a little bit, but it was not as big as it is now. But the first trimesters in China, there was an increase of 11.8% of their PIB, and in the second semesters there was a decrease of the increase to 9.1, and at the third trimesters they were able to raise it to 10%. So it's we can see that it's probably not a permanent crisis, of course, but it will be in a short time period of time. We will have a big of course decrease of our economy. The Conference Board of Canada forecasts on March 17, last week, that we should have a contraction of the economy by 2.7%, but a rebound in the third and fourth quarters with a 0.3% slight increase on the year, and 2.5% of growth in 2021. But this week we had other forecasts that was made by major Canadian banks, and they expect a contraction of the economy between 10% and 24% in the second quarter. So it was a lot worse, the forecast made this week by the Canadian banks. Fortunately, after 2 months and rigorous management of the crisis, the situation returns to normal right now in China. So we hope that it will last the same 2 months here, because of course we are facing right now a major crisis. So I will let now Marc Lapointe talk to you about the impact on fundraising programs. So Marc, that's your turn.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. I'm going to be talking about the impact on fundraising programs, but the first things that we should talk about is the fact on because we are all and everyone is being affected by this crisis. I'm out in Atlantic Canada. We've gotten to the point now where we've actually closed the interprovincial borders. We actually have police stopping people as they come across the borders from PEI and from Quebec and from Nova Scotia into New Brunswick. The truth, and it's true for all 4 Atlantic provinces, other restrictions have taken place everywhere. Everyone is being asked to stay in their home, and non-essential workers have been asked to go home, and there's a loss of income and a loss of possibly donations. So we're going to talk about how to look at this on the impact on your fundraising programs. A few things that we should talk about is the fact that, first of all, anytime you're talking to anyone, be it your employees, be it your prospects, your donors, some of the larger donors that you're closer to, your partners, even people in government who help finance some of your programs. Always be respectful of the fact that this situation has affected everyone. So please ask them, how is this affecting you? What are the changes that you've had to deal with? Are there some challenges that we can assist you with? And don't forget to communicate your own needs. So you have to plan to look at what your needs are in the time of COVID-19. If you're a food bank, we know that will probably have a vast increase in the amount of clients that will be coming and asking you for food only because of all the layoffs. And, other charities and not-for-profits will also have other challenges. So plan for your immediate challenges. What are they? And the other plan that you've got to make is, when we come out of COVID-19, what will our needs be at that point in time, and how must our material change? So let's look at what we do right now in terms of what we call annual programs. So I'm not sure who's doing this, but could you go back, Marie, to the annual programs, please? Yeah, very good. So in terms of direct mail and email campaigns, well, one thing you should know is, if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's been announced that Canada Post is actually closed. So direct mail at this point in time might be a bit of a difficult gamble for you, only because if you're in a province where it's closed because an employee has been found to have COVID-19, which was the case in Newfoundland, one of the Canada Post employees in the sorting center had COVID-19, and so they had to close it down. So there's no direct mail in Newfoundland and Labrador. If you are in other areas, what's happening is people are scared of transmission through touching things. They're leery about going to the grocery stores. They're certainly leery about going to their mailbox and picking out their mail. So what you really want to do is, you want to possibly transition into email campaigns. Again, those email campaigns should be looking to your immediate needs. So if you're going to communicate with your donors, do communicate with them respectfully, asking them how these situations have affected them. But if there is a way that they can still assist you, these are your needs, communicate your needs, and at that point, you're able to ask if there is the possibility of a gift. If you do have existing campaigns, you may have to modify the messages. So look at your messages very critically. If your message, for example, is saying things like, in these unprecedented good times, we really need to help those who are in need. Yes, we need to help those who are in need, but please, let's not be tone deaf. Let's modify the messages to ensure that people understand that we know we're in COVID-19 restrictions, these unprecedented restrictions, and that our messages reflect that. And even as you're coming out of COVID-19 and you have your campaigns possibly pre-planned, look at those messages very critically and ensure that they reflect the reality that we're going to be coming back into once this crisis is over, because at some point it will be. Although even when it will be over, the world will have changed. And so your message has to reflect the world that we live in. Make sure that you are keeping on communicating with your donors, with your employees, with your partners, with even your government partners, and explain what your needs are. Don't just put a sign in the window saying we're closed and we're gone. That indicates that you don't have any needs, and possibly your donors will want to move towards people who are explaining their needs very carefully to them. And so you don't want to lose your donors. You don't want your employees to feel discouraged. You want to explain what you're doing facing COVID-19, how this is affecting you. Hopefully that it's not affecting them too much. And if there's anything you can do to help them, you will. And also, you want to just make sure that your communication is going out and saying maybe you've transitioned from an in-person operation to an online operation. Let them know about that and how they can communicate with you in the future. And again, always inform your donors and partners on your organization's issues. The big issue about not communicating is it may very well lead to disinterest from your donors and then moving on to other causes that they feel are more urgent and need their help more. So there will be gifts in this period of time. It's just a question of, do you communicate yours properly. What if you're in a major gifts or a planned giving campaign or even a massive comprehensive campaign? Well, make sure that you are communicating with your donors, but personalize your communication, especially with your major donors. And thank your donors for all of their loyalty in what are these very difficult, unusual, and extraordinary times. In everything that we always do, one of the things that fundraisers have to do is be clear and truthful. But in this case, it's even more important to ensure that your information is clear, that you are communicating that your project isn't dead, that it's time, it will be going on, that you will be coming back and asking for people. But in the meantime, here is some information that we can provide you with that will give you that sense that our project will be ongoing, and so that we will still be interested in discussing with you the possibility of a gift down the road when everyone knows what is going on in terms of economics. And like I say, in some cases, you may very well want to talk to some of your major donors and say, listen, we understand, we don't usually come back to you this quickly, but we are facing something very unusual and very extraordinary, and we really need help and don't know if your situation allows it. Do you think it's possible for you to provide us with some help, even though we're not usually here, but these aren't usual times? In some cases, some of your donors may come back to you and say, listen, I'm not able to meet that commitment I've made to you. And instead of simply saying, oh, well, that's too bad, we can let that go, you might want to propose, listen, why don't we stretch out the commitment a little more and change things? So during times of crisis, what happens is that your timelines will stretch. It may not be as easy to complete your campaign as it was, but it may be, as we come out of the crisis, things will turn around. And there's also accommodations that have to be made. You can't just stick to your guns. You really have to realize that situations are completely different from what they used to be. And it's also a good time to be doing background work. So if you know who your major donors are, communicate with them. But the other thing you might want to do is you do want to start looking into who are the prospects that we should be talking to when we come out of this. So do all that planning and background work, and then when things are starting to go in the right way, you're prepared to come out of the gates with a proper message, with a well-planned campaign, and with a good list of people that you can talk to in terms of prospects for your gifts, for your committees, for your cabinets. So our recommendation is that all organizations who are in any of the active phases or preparatory phases continue meeting with their various committees. So, but you should do so online because you're not supposed to meet together. So please meet online and use one of the online tools, and just keep that communication open so everybody continues to be motivated and alert. About event management, well, let's face it, there's no in-person events until further notice from any of our governments. You can push back the date to an event when you can be relatively sure that it will go ahead, or you can convert your event into a fundraising campaign. So create a plan with your board, with your and your event committees, and say, okay, how do we ensure that the funds that are going to come in, or that were supposed to be coming in from this event, will continue to come in? BNP did have one of its clients that actually turned around and said to people, well, we recognize we can't hold our event right now, but that money that you were going to give us on the ticket, would you mind converting it into a gift? Well, 90% of that money, or 90% of the net revenue that they usually make from that event, actually they were able to make it through that request. So there are things that you can continue doing in terms of turning an event into a gift, asking the people who are supporting you if they want to do that. If you're holding an auction or a fundraiser, there are online tools that allow you to hold online auctions and fundraisers. It will modify the way that you do things, and you will have to communicate in a different way, but perhaps it will be just as effective. We're all at home. One of the things that I've realized in my personal situation is that a lot of my business expenses that I normally have on a monthly basis simply haven't happened because I've been told to stay at home, and I've been very good about doing that. So it gives me a little more cash in my pocket. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I recognize that, and I've started giving some money to the things that I think are the most important at this time. But on the other hand, it would allow me to support an organization that comes to me and asks me for a gift. So ask your followers to donate to your organization instead of buying tickets, and you could get some very surprising results. And that is my part, and I will pass this along to Danielle.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And just before we forget to tell you, you can ask a question anytime in the chat. We will keep some time at the end to answer them. So really feel free if you have any question. We have a period of question and answers at the end. So just a bit like the events that Mark talked about that are essential but very expensive in the day-to-day, human resources are certainly very essential and certainly very expensive also in the budget items. So it's a fact, and it's inevitable that HR management will be impacted during this pandemic. The decrease in cash inflows and government measures have a direct effect. So in this context, what I simply do is I invite you to explore different scenarios that we will look at today. So if we move on to the next slide, not earlier this week, Quebec and Ontario government and maybe other provinces took important steps to keep only essential businesses and services open. So we're talking about physical workplaces. However, if you're already 100% teleworking, you can still continue to operate even if you are not on this list. And if you feel that you should be on this list, you can also make a request right now. In Quebec, there's a website. If you go directly on quebec.ca/coronavirus, so there's a phone number, there's a website to request to be had on this list. In Ontario, I know there's the Stop the Spread business information line that you can contact. But so really, this kind of change the day-to-day basic operation you might have. So right now, you kind of have only two options. If you're not an essential service, is going teleworking or closing for a while. And if you're in essential services, you still have to ask a couple of questions yourself. So moving to the next slide, shared responsibility. So this is a case during this current pandemic, but this is also what is all the time, and we have to think and remember that, and I think it's a good opportunity to remember it right now. So employers and employees' health is a joint responsibility. So here you have the text, going back to the previous slide, so here you have the text of laws in Quebec, but it's quite similar in all other provinces as well as in the Canada Labor Code if your charity is registered under the federal laws. So thus, nonprofit and all organizations have an obligation in terms of occupational health and safety towards the employees, especially in this event of pandemics. Nonprofit and companies are required to put in place all the means suited for the risk involved and must organize themselves to anticipate and limit the spread of the virus. So if you are still open, make sure your employees have convenient, easy access to wash their hands. Make sure they know the symptoms. Everybody at this point should know the symptoms, but you never know. And if you will home work, then make sure that you put everything in place to do so. And I would suggest, even if you're still an essential business, if you can put everything you can in home work and working remotely, this is the best way to reduce the propagation of the virus right now. And if your employees are working from home, make sure to keep contact with them as much as you can. We're talking a bit more in the last days about it, but anxiety and stress will certainly be in their agenda, and you still have a responsibility there because you are still the employer, even if you're not physically with them. And employees, on the other hand, they also have to take necessary measures to make sure that they protect their own health and the health of their others if they have to come to work. You should know that an employee could refuse to come to work if they believe you haven't took the sufficient measure to make sure that you're making it safe and sound for people. An employee can also refuse to come to work if they consider maybe a colleague is at risk of infection. So you have to be aware of all those laws, limits, and responsibility that you might have to face in the coming days. Moving to the next slide, it's saying deciding rapidly, but I hope that you already asked those questions yourself. Does the foundation offices remain open, or do they close? Can they still be open after March 23rd announcement from Ontario Doug Ford and Quebec Prime Minister as well? So you have to ask yourself a question. So if teleworking is your option, have you provided the necessary tool for remote access? Did you choose the platform you were going to use? Do you know if it is IT safe? You have to ask a couple of questions. You have to forward your calls to some cell phones. You have to get a mechanism for mail, but you might receive a bit less mail in the coming days. Have you done your bank deposit at the time? You have to consider a couple of questions that cannot be done from work. But also you have to ask yourself, is teleworking really possible? And it is obviously the ideal scenario, but you have to ask yourself, if each employee can keep their contribution at bay. The answer will not necessarily be the same for everyone. For example, if an employee is dedicated to enter donation in a CRM and the CRM is not in the cloud, well, you can try as much as possible to keep them on the payroll, but if you cannot do the job, you cannot do any other job, you have to take some hard decision at some point. So, but you also have, you and your board of directors, you have to agree that you will face a temporary decrease in productivity even if you go 100% into teleworking. Your expectation must adapt to the uniqueness of the situation. And if teleworking is possible, there are a couple of great things to consider, like having a dedicated workspace. Preferably avoid the corner of the dining room if you can. Make yourself a task list. Keep on with your calendar and agenda. Do so as if you were in the office. Keep in touch with your colleagues to keep your bearings. There are many free and expensive resources online. Messenger, Skype, Teams, Slack, Google Hangouts. There's a GoToMeeting that is free for 3 months for nonprofit in this moment, so you might consider that. Make recurring meetings to make up for the lack of follow-up you have in person and all the informal information that you get in the offices that you cannot get from the teleworking. If you have children, good luck, courage. Do whatever you can. I have a 3-year-old son. It is quite challenging right now. So you may need to split your day. Start early when it's still asleep. Get some pause for the breakfast. Work after that during a Frozen 2 movie or anything. But you have to handle that. Yeah. And employers start to think about the future right now. When this will be over, start making plans for the coming back. Everybody, you should be very aware that employees will judge the organization and board on how they handle the situation, no matter the decision. This is not necessarily the decision that it will judge you on, but the way you did that. This is a major opportunity to work on your mobilization and retention right now. So certainly put some time in it. Moving to the next slide. If one or more employees cannot work, that might be a business decision. That might be because you're not on the essential list. That might be because they have symptoms, illness, or quarantine right now. So when teleworking is not in the option, right now, I would say you are limited if you're not considered essential. Maybe teleworking can be possible at a reduced time. Maybe you can share time with colleagues. Maybe you can keep your employees, but put them on 0 hours a week to maintain the employment relationship, to make them eligible for what is called the New Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB, that was just announced yesterday. I'm talking about the $200,000 per month that just was announced yesterday. So there are many programs that you'll find in the document created by BNP that we will receive after this webinar. However, this document does not include the New Canada Emergency Response Benefit that does cancel the Emergency Care Benefit and the Emergency Support Benefit that was just created a few days ago. Government of Canada is like building the plane while being in the plane, but I think it just makes sense with the situation right now. So I cannot go deeply in each and every single program because they are quite different by every province and territories in Canada. But I will just do a brief overlook at this, but you have all the information in the document that will be sent with the webinar. You can also consider other information or other way to keep paying them for a while, like using the time banks, vacation, illness, overtime. But employees need to agree. You cannot force them to use those time banks. As I was saying, there's a lot of programs in provincial and federal. I'm thinking about Prince Edward Island that does have an emergency income relief for the self-employed. There's the work sharing program in Canada to keep your employees at work. So just work like you reduce the hour, but they get a compensation from the employment insurance. But if you're looking for any of those options, really take time to make sure that you're eligible. Most of the time, non-for-profit are. It's just written in small typo somewhere in the document, but you can find that somewhere. And make sure you look at all the opportunities before you do consider to make a temporary layoff. And when we're saying temporary layoff, there's the word temporary. So in Quebec, it's about 6 months. In Ontario, usually it's 13 weeks, but it can go up to 35 if you meet some criteria. If you register under the Canada law, then usually it's 3 months, but it can go up to 12. So remember that laying off people does put you at risk to lose them. There's other nonprofit that might still go for headhunting or might go for recruitment. So this has put you at some risk to lose them. But also, I certainly understand, and it's totally all right to know that keeping all your people, if you don't have the possibility to keep them in your budget, well, just put you at risk to lose the entire charity. So it really is a balance and a risk and crisis management that you have to look at with a crisis committee that you might have on your board of directors. So really look at all the information available, look at all the programs, and after make the best decision you can in this situation. And if you're still open because you are an essential service or you're still working, you must be ready to face that some employee could be absent because they have to take care of their children or family. You could still have to do temporary layoff even if you're still open. And your employees might request to use their available time bank. So that can be a solution, but it can be a problem if you may not have all the cash flow needed to do so. So, and if your employees have symptoms of disease or need to quarantine, they can certainly have a possibility of absence of illness that could go up to 6 months. Really look at your group insurance. Ask them if they are covered in short-term disability, if you can still offer the insurance while they are on a layoff. Usually you can if you still pay for it. You just won't get the salary insurance during this period, of course. So really look with your insurance what you can do. If you of course don't have any group insurance, in this case, there's only the record of employment that you can use with the sickness or injury box that you have to check. And if you have to do so, produce the record of employment ASAP without any delay. Just last week, they received 930,000 requests for employment insurance. So I guess you can certainly guess that it's taking a bit more time to get an answer. And so we're talking about a month and a half or more just to get the approval or an answer. And so yes, some checks will be coming out on April 6th, but anybody who's requesting employment insurance right now might have to wait a bit more. Which brings us to the last page of the HR portion. So what is important right now for HR? You have two options right now. The first one, if you're in essential services, you have to decide who stays at the office, who's working from home. If you're not essential, then you only have two options: is teleworking or closing for a while. Be sure to maintain contact between employees, even if you have to let them go for a while, even if they're home, you're not paying them, keep contact with them. Let them know what is going on in your organization. And try, if you can, to redefine working priorities, because if your events are canceled, postponed, or anything, you might be able to keep your people, but to ask them to do something else. If you must close, plan, it's not really HR, but plan a timeline for communicating with your donors. Remind them that you still exist, that you are still relevant, that you're just taking a pause because you have to do so, and that they can still donate online. So just remember to do so. Follow every single day the evolution of the pandemic and government measures. They do change every single day. You cannot believe how many times I changed those slides and the document that is giving to you. So, and also prepare for the future and work on a contingency plan of operation. You certainly didn't have one. That is all right, but you won't have any excuse for the next time to not have one. And if you were worried about COVID-19, many provinces is 811. For employees in Quebec, there's a Quebec, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island. There's also a toll-free number that you can find on this slide. So thank you so much, and I'll leave it to Marie.
Okay, so thank you. These are exceptional times, there's no doubt. And I've experienced several financial crises over the course of my career. In fact, I almost stopped working before I even got started because of the famous Black Monday crash in 1987. That was the day when we experienced the biggest decline in the stock market in a single session until COVID-19. But I decided to persevere, and luckily I did, because as you can see from this slide, the markets have gone up substantially in the past 30 years. But for sure, the worst period for me was the 2008-2009 crisis, which we called the Great Recession. And during this period, the markets declined for 18 consecutive months. We thought it would never end, and it seemed like the whole global financial system was on the verge of bankruptcy. But you know, we learn a lot in hindsight after each crisis, and what we learn is that each crisis has an end, and the markets continue to go up. So if you look back to the financial crisis that I was talking about earlier, at the bottom of the crisis in March 2009, in the following year, the US market went up 68% in the next 12 months. So that is a significant rebound. However, very few investors ended up making a return that was similar to the index. And there's a reason for that. It's because emotions are the investor's worst fear. Fear and greed is what causes most investment mistakes, because people always want to buy when the market's going up. And when it starts to go down, we feel anxiety, we feel fear, we start to panic, and then we want to sell. And that's probably what a lot of people are feeling right now. So I'm sure if we could find a way to enter the market as it was going up and sell before it goes down completely, we would end up making money. But that's rarely what happens. As you can see from this slide, the markets move very quickly. And if you miss just a few of the important rebound days, your return will be affected substantially. Just this week, we saw in one day, the markets went up over 10%. We haven't seen one day bounces in indices like that for almost 90 years. It goes back to the Great Depression, in fact. So let's be clear, this is not the time to sell your investments. You have a fiduciary responsibility to manage your organization's funds, and you most probably have an investment policy and the oversight of an investment committee. You no doubt have your assets in some type of a diversified portfolio. And as you can see here, not all asset classes or even stock markets are positively correlated. So what you can see from this graph is that, for example, the US market has done well 2019, 2018. In 2017, it was emerging markets. But there were years like 2011 where it was bonds that outperformed even equity markets. So getting back to my point, now is not the time to sell stocks for reasons that I mentioned earlier. You might want to defer some of your expenses in order to meet your operating needs, and you'll have to plan accordingly. Furthermore, what we've seen since the Great Recession, which I alluded to earlier, 2008, 2009, we are in an extremely low interest rate environment. And with the COVID-19 crisis, interest rates have gone down even further. So investments which we have historically considered safe, like GICs and bonds, are yielding very little. And you'll need to take this into consideration when you're projecting your return on investments and managing your disbursements. So we don't know at this point how long the crisis will last. That's the question I keep getting asked day after day. But as Christian alluded to earlier, we are starting to see some positive signs. In places where the virus started in China, life is slowly returning to normal. And as you know, extraordinary isolation measures are being taken to prevent the virus from spreading quickly and reach vulnerable populations. Just this week, we've had governments announce incredible stimulative packages, both monetary and fiscal. And this should help their economies and their citizens. So when stock markets start to probably reach the points that I was saying earlier, where people are very discouraged, that doesn't mean that there won't be a turnaround. In fact, the markets look out 6 to 9 months to consider economic news. So it could be that things still look pretty grim when the markets start to resume their climb. We'll just go back to my conclusion slide there. Thank you. So to conclude, once again, every crisis has a beginning and an end. And after every crisis, the stock markets rebound, often very quickly, as we've seen this week. There are days when the markets can go up substantially. So do not try to time the markets. They move too quickly, and you don't want to miss the good days. This is not the time to sell your investments. You must control your expenses and communicate. I'd also say to each and every one of you, as well as to your organizations, find distractions that support your mental and physical health. Because to take care of others, which is what you will all do, you must first take care of yourself. So I'll hand the mic back to Christian.
Thank you, Mary.
I think it's my turn, Mary.
Yes, it's Marie-Claire who is take charge of the last portion of the webinar. So Marie-Claire.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Mary. It's very interesting comments. And I guess what I would add to what all my colleagues and Mary have shared with you today, first of all, thank you for joining us, is the following. After you've heard the previous elements of this webinar, you must be thinking, why do I have a plan to face this crisis? The reassuring part is that only 33% of non-for-profits in Canada have a contingency plan. So you're not alone. Now, what is a contingency plan? It's really part of your business plan or your development, multi-year development plan. And it allows you to look at your risk management. So while you're not alone, it's never too late to plan a contingency plan. So it provides you options to deal with situations as we are living now with the COVID-19. It allows you to manage the situation, but to minimize also all of the negativity and the, the bad circumstances that are coming your way and not permitting you to do business as usual. So the priority right now for everyone is to try to pursue your operations. That's not an easy thing when you're now not able to go to work, meet people. We have extraordinary tools that you've heard about this morning. But the other part is that 50% of not-for-profits in the US even do not have enough of a reserve in their bank accounts to be able to survive or to continue to operate without new revenue for more than a month. So as you see, it's a part of our responsibilities in the not-for-profit to do as the for-profit business community does, and which is to, as this crisis lifts and you go back to normality or the beginning of normality, you really want to start thinking about the after COVID-19, the post-mortem, and what are you going to do about it to be able to ensure that you don't have to go through this a second time if for some unfortunate reason you're faced with this in the coming years. It can certainly, taking the time and the effort and the energy to prepare a contingency plan will definitely bring you peace of mind. And it would allow you to also to involve your personnel, your board, your committee members in planning this. So I guess primarily the message for the contingency plan is that it's not only a good business practice, it's your role to steward the organization. So some of the 8 steps that we need to think about when we're managing through the difficult times like we are today, and bearing in mind that this is a historic event, we've never seen the entire world shut down because of a medical threat. Is it going to happen in the future? Again, maybe. But one thing is for certain, as my colleagues and Mary was referring to earlier, there will be other times when we are in a difficult situation and we need a plan to protect all the work that people have been doing multi-year, and your volunteers, your personnel, your donors. So we need to bring everybody together and find solutions. So you need to think about those 8 important steps that are listed here on the sheet in front of you. So you need to act quickly, not panic. Sit down. What's the worst that's going to happen? Well, everything's going to collapse, but you're not going there. You need to protect your essential services and your operations, especially if you're in an area where you're serving people who rely almost totally or importantly on your services and your support. You need always to think about protecting your mission, your mandate. Always go back to your vision. Consolidate, the pluses that you have by talking to your boards, by establishing a committee that's going to help you face the crisis, by identifying the leaders in your organization who are apt, able, and who have the resources to do it. I'm not talking only financial resources, but personal, physical, human, intellectual resources, and who are willing to get involved. And that will allow you to keep strong for you and your team. The word communicate has come back constantly. It's the most essential component of helping us through the crisis. Imagine if we did not, if we, instead of having a medical crisis, we had had a information and internet crisis. No more telephones, no more internet, no more web, no more FaceTime. That would have been really something. So we need to use the tools that we have to allow us to communicate to the best of our ability. Yes, with our donors, our staff, our board members. I think that everyone is of equal importance when you face a crisis like we're facing now. And everyone will contribute something unique to finding solutions. You need to look at your structure, how you're organized, look at your plan, look at how the organization is functioning, and make sure that you have the ability and the flexibility to make the choices that you need to make in the most efficient manner to allow you to move forward. Even if you're reducing costs, you want to make sure that you are going to maintain to the best of your ability the impact on the beneficiaries, the people who rely on you. By involving the board, you're making decisions that are validated and espoused by the board, so you're safe. You're making decisions not on your own that you're going to be held accountable for later. You make sure that everybody's on board, and then you move forward. You do not act in a panic. You take the time to plan, to reflect, and to make the right decisions. And I think that communicating openly, being transparent, being truthful, and doing it on a regular basis will allow you also much better results. So your contingency plan will help you define, first of all, the health and safety of your employees, those who come into work. Without our staff, without our team, there's no way that our organizations can move forward or even exist. It's not only about the donors. although the donors are obviously essential. If you put a crisis management team in place, you'll also feel much less alone, and several heads are better than one. You're trying to maintain your operations and pursue your services to the best of your ability. In this instance, for example, the governments have defined very clearly those organizations that need to remain open, whether it's the health clinics or, I'm thinking about the organizations for homeless people, the hospitals, obviously, the drugstores, stuff like that. You need to try and maintain your revenues, and you need to try to limit and counteract the impact of the loss of income. Several of my colleagues have said earlier, it's not because you're in a crisis that you cannot continue to speak, interact, and interface with your most important donors who have, probably many of them or most of them, the ability to make a difference. They can make a decision to make an exceptional gift during a time of crisis. Why? Because it's a time of crisis. So you need to continue to contribute and to communicate with them and see what is possible. Managing and minimizing the expenses is a very important way to allow you to continue to move forward. In your plan, your contingency plan, even if you're going to articulate it in a time of crisis, you need to look at how you're going to reduce your expenses and by what level. Is it going to be 10%, 20, 30, 50? Depends on your ability to manage in the circumstances that you're faced with. You need to protect your employees, make sure that you take care of them, that they know also that you care about their future and their important role in your organization, and you need to support them to the best of your ability. In this instance, with the help and support of the government, I think that there are many alternatives and opportunities to support the staff. You need to, again, ensure constant communications, remain frank, and you need to manage expectations by being frank. With the donors, with the employees, with the volunteers, with all your partners. In my opinion, in my over 30 years of pure fundraising, the most important part of my ability to raise money was to have integrity, to be honest, and to never veil or manipulate the truth. And it is possible to do it. So in normal times, you should always have a contingency plan, which allows you to be able to continue functioning for 3 to 6 months, even if you had no new influx of fresh revenue, so to speak. So this is something you need to think about, and we're certainly, BNP and our team, going to be there. We're there during the crisis and after the crisis to give advice and to support and help organizations that are not in a position right now to have a contingency plan as part of their business plan, to help you think about that and how you're going to make it happen. Not an easy thing. It's often very strategic decisions about not having the money available up front in the year that you raise it. But without it, you are exposing yourself and the organization to some very unpleasant and unexpected fallouts, as we're experiencing today. So I believe that this completes my presentation for the contingency plan. And I want to thank all of you for participating. We are very happy to answer all your questions at this point. And I will be directing and receiving the questions, and then myself and my colleagues will try to answer to the best of our ability. If after the webinar you have other questions that you hadn't thought about asking, that you would like to pose, please feel free to communicate with us, and we will answer them. So thank you, everyone. And I'm now opening the question period. Okay, I'm sorry. I see that they came in just, I wasn't looking at the right place, so I apologize for that. So one of the participants is asking if we have a sustainable business strategy plan, like tools and techniques to become a purpose-driven business leader in situations like the COVID-19. Well, I'm sure that yes, we would, and we do. And it's not easy to share that just during the webinar, but we have counseled many of our groups. I think the content of the webinar is an example of how we think that you can face the crisis and continue to operate. And, you know, it may seem overwhelming right now because there are many different aspects, but you need to start with the one that is the most relevant for you, which is it's either, you know, first taking care of your staff and then talking to maybe 1 or 2 donors, seeing what they think. You know, important donors and major donors are always pleased to answer questions and to give advice. So involving them is a good way. I don't know if someone wants to add to what I just responded to right now on our team. Another question is, what is the alternative investments in crisis period like this? Mary, you may want to answer this question.
Yes. So I think by alternative investments, we're talking about something that might not be correlated 100% to the equity markets. There are different types of investments that have capital guarantee features to them that offer index-like returns. There are alternative investments that are outside of the equity markets as well. So depending on what the time frame for investment is and the investment policy, alternative investments aren't necessarily more conservative than equity, but they can just be different. However, you know, as I say, it depends on the investment policy, the time frame for the investment period, but there are definitely ways of protecting a portfolio that are outside of the pure equity world. We're hearing a lot about liquid alternative investments. I don't really have time to go into that on this particular call, but for sure there are different ways of making an investment portfolio more robust and to protect it in environments like we're seeing today. There's commodities like gold. So it really depends on what the finance team has decided and what the investment horizon is, because some of these types of products do need time in order to do their job.
Thank you, Mary. One of the other questions is the person asking the question is obviously recognizing that communication is obviously the best technique. I think we all understand that as a team today. However, the person is asking, how can we master negotiation techniques in order to secure the maximum value of our organization? I would say that if you do not have, for example, and many organizations do not have marketing or communication specialists on site or on their staff, it's important to look at the resources on your board. You have someone who can guide you. It's important to look at your overall priority in your contingency plan or in your current crisis management plan, and see if you do not feel comfortable tackling, you know, how to develop this current negotiation at a time of crisis, to be able to call on volunteers or, you know, someone that has experience in communications who can guide you. Would someone on our team want to add to what I've just shared? Okay. Now, the big question here is, what are the alternatives, if ever, the internet connection is dead. Well, I think we've all thought about that. And right now, I think the only alternative is probably the telephone. And it's a great invention. I would say that. I would also suggest that in a time, however, where we are not allowed to circulate, we're not allowed to meet, it is compounded by, the fact that you might be able to take your car and deliver an envelope in a mailbox, asking someone to call you or asking someone to respond. But I think that the telephone would probably be the next best alternative. Would someone like to add to my comments? Okay. Another question which I find very interesting is there a way to strengthen our capacity to unlock our potential to create strategies? Well, what I would say to this question is the following. In times of crises, all the walls seem to disappear. So what wasn't possible yesterday or the day before, everyone has much more impetus and enthusiasm, or the willingness to help, the desire to make things happen, to participate and to collaborate. So perhaps in the past, certain suggestions were made that people just didn't want to respond to or relate to. And right now you can think out of the box. And in fact, you almost don't have a choice but to think out the box. You need to find solutions very quickly, and solutions that were not necessary maybe a week, a day, or 2 months, or a year ago. People do think differently in times of crises. So creating this contingency plan, finding your crisis management team and leadership, this is the time that you sit down and you think about not only resolving the very important issue that you're faced with today, right? Survival today. But also you need to bring that group together and start thinking about the post era of the crises. And going back to your development plan, going back to your multi-year business plan, as Marc was saying earlier, you need to look at everything you've done now under a different light, because people will be different and some things will be different once we come out of the crises. I have gone through many important crises in my career. I agree with Mary, it always bounces back, but you have to help it bounce back. So in terms of creating new strategies, I think it's time to think out of the box and to invite people that you had not invited before to the table and ask for advice and see what they think. Would anyone like to add to the comment for this question? And if not, I'll turn over the webinar session now to Christian. And I thank you again for participating.
I think I'd like to add something. I think I'd like to add something to that last question. So for thinking outside the box, it can be a bit difficult right now when we're working remotely and we don't feel well connected with our teams or our organization. So I think part of the creativity that we have to use now is how can we reach out to the people who we work with, keep them involved, keep them thinking about the future, and use this time to continue to be productive, constructive, and creative in how we speak with our teams and organize for the future.
Thanks a lot, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, everybody, for your participation to the webinar. We will continue to communicate with you in the next few weeks, and we hope that this crisis will last not so long. And we will provide you the information by email, the webinar presentation will be sent to you by Maria Roux from our communication coordinator. And we just want to tell you that we have BNP Online. It's a free consultation service that we provide. So if you would like to have any information, any advice, we are able to help you. And you can communicate with us by email or by calling us at the 1-888-528-8566 number, extension 22. And we will have a COVID-19 web page on our website that we will put in place in the next few days, and with all resources that we can have and we can find that could be useful for charities. And we will also publish an info letter that will be sent each week up to the end of this crisis, and we hope that it won't last too long. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we hope that you find it interesting, and you find it that you could apply some recommendation, and we will hope that we will pass through that crisis together. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.